For George Pearson, Dave Trabert, Danedri Herbert, let's give a warm Pachyderm welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Bob was too bashful to say that we also had given Bob a Spirit of Freedom Award. What was that, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Bob?
2013.
2013. Okay, so we are delighted to be here. And Bob, also, guys, I don't know that you need to. John Todd held up his pen and said he records these meetings from. Come on, I mean, it's the CIA. They're here somewhere. I wanted to, before we turn it over to Danedri, I just want to give you a little bit of background about how the Sentinel came to be. It's a nonprofit online journalism site that it's dedicated to holding media and government accountable. About 18 months ago, the Kansas Policy Institute Board of Trustees and staff decided that we wanted to put together a freedom infrastructure for Kansas. I mean, the left has a lot of taxpayer-funded organizations, lobbyists. They have a lot of community organizations, and frankly, they tend to have media on their side. And so we wanted to have a group of organizations that could counterbalance that and provide people more information so you can all make up your own fully informed decision. So we started setting up these organizations. One of them was Success for Kansas Students. That was the first one launched. The second one was the Sentinel. We launched that in January of this year. And the way the organizations work is they are separate 501c3s so that they have their own board of directors. I do serve on the board as well as our Vice President Policy Director, James Franco. But we have minority representation on the board. Our other board members are Al Higdon, Paul Sutar, where's Paul? He's back there working, there he is. And John Lewis from Johnson County. John has Lewis Legal News. So we have a board of directors that runs separate. It's all nonprofit, but we also use shared service agreements. So if these organizations want, they can contract with KPI. So we provide a lot of their back office functions. So like they hire us to do their fundraising and their marketing and some other things, which allows them to keep their costs very low and just stay focused on their mission. So on your table, there should be something that lays out this freedom infrastructure. Not everything is operational yet. We have a lot of long-term plans. But we're delighted to have, when we put this together, to really put together a dream team of all-star journalists. Jack Cashel is one of the editors. Jack has written a lot of books. He writes for American Spectator, American Thinker. He's published, 20-some books. And Danedri, as you heard, is also an experienced journalist. We wanted people who weren't afraid to go out and find the facts and tell you some of the things that you're either not getting or not getting accurately from media and government. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Danedri and talk a little bit about some of the things you've covered.
Okay, I didn't really prepare a very long presentation. It's only going to be about an hour and a half. So at the end of that, I will take 3 hours of questions, and then we can go from there. Just kidding. I would rather mostly take questions, but on your table, you will see that there's some. If you haven't been to our website, it's sentinelksmo.org. And am I too loud? Yes, okay, sorry. It's sentinelksmo.org, and you'll find the stuff we've been working on. But some of those headlines are on your table, as well as there's one story here about KCTV5. Mostly what I try to do is I get up in the morning and read all the newspapers and try to find the lies, which is not that hard. I shouldn't say lies, that's not fair. The mischaracterization. So for example, there's the top corner is Eagle laments firm lays off for people. Earlier this week, the Eagle ran a story. It was very small, but it was a story that basically said there's an architecture firm here that laid off 4 people because school funding they're not spending enough money on school funding. I mean, number one, if in a city the size of Wichita, if somebody lays off 4 people, is that news? But if we're going to call it news, okay, let's look into the reasons why. Their suggestion was that we're not funding school building enough, which isn't true. This is a really smart audience, so I don't have to tell you all the details. But essentially, capital aid is what funds schools in Kansas, essentially, and that funding is actually increasing. And so it's a question there. And then why didn't they report that? I mean, if you're going to look into the reason why don't you report it? Why don't you put out there that, well, they say funding decreased and that's why they're laying off people, but honestly, funding's up. So it's some other reason. What's the other reason? Maybe it's that we aren't building new schools because we don't have new students, or the economy's changing. And also, they should probably have mentioned that Kansas unemployment, I think today, they just released it's dropped even more. It's below 4%. It's below the national average. So these desperate, destitute architects are going to be able to find other jobs. So they kind of missed all of that. So if there's not a story, so those stories are all over everywhere, and honestly, I don't catch all of them. I read through them, and sometimes nothing jumps out at me, and then somebody sends me an email and says, did you see this? They said this, and I don't, it's so prevalent that I don't see all of it. So if you'd like to send me an email about something you see, please do. I would love to have it. But then, in addition to just finding those stories that are maybe missing some of the point, I like to find maybe some of the narrative. Like right now, until very, very recently, there was a very loud narrative out of Topeka about St. Francis is closing, and their reason for St. Francis closing is because we're not expanding Medicaid. And I actually I'm not the most open-minded person, but on that topic, I'm somewhat open-minded in that, okay, why are hospitals closing? Maybe should be the question, not just the answer is because of Medicaid. Well, that might be part of it, but what's the rest of it? And we weren't getting that, so we're starting to get some of that. But it's, hospitals are changing. The way care is developed, the way healthcare is delivered is changing. People don't go to hospitals and stay. Even when you have a baby, I think my mom stayed in the hospital for like a month, and now you stay for like a day, if that. And if you go get a knee replacement, you stay for 2 days, and then they come to your house. So we don't necessarily need these huge hospitals. We're not delivering care in the same fashion. So while that might be part of the story, Medicaid expansion, I would argue differently, but okay, that might be part of it. It's definitely not the whole story, and we're not getting the rest of it if that's all we're hearing, that one part. So that's kind of the goal, or where I'm going with what I'm trying to do and what we're trying to do. And I think at this point, unless you guys just want to hear me ramble for an hour, I would love to take questions if you have any. And Jennifer would like to give you a microphone.
Hi there. Thank you guys for all the work you do. It sure is nice being able to actually get news, not the fake news. So thank you guys. All you do. We know that we have so much heat, but don't believe what people say about you because we believe in you.
Thank you.
My question is about, I live in the Goddard School District, and there's billboards everywhere saying, vote yes for kids. Which makes me very worried because you don't see anything else. It just says yes for kids. Do you guys know anything about that?
I don't offhand, but
That, I would imagine there's a bond issue that's up, and that alone raises a number of questions. Do you know who paid for those billboards?
No.
I don't know if it says, I don't know the answer to that. But when you look at, and this is a case where media is often asking, if it's somebody running for office, the first thing they want to do is ask, now, who's paying for these ads and who are they going to be beholden to? And oftentimes what happens is that you have the people, the contractors and the architects are putting up a lot of money for bond issue. Vote yes for kids? Well, that's like, come on, let's be honest. Let's talk about what the real issue is. So I would imagine that that's another bond issue that's being floated.
Over here with Carl. Oh, did you want to add something?
all I was going to say is that even some of those things, I think that's one of the advantages of KPI and some of these organizations trying to build an infrastructure. Whenever there's a bond issue announced, the school already has an infrastructure. They have a list of email addresses of all of the parents, and they can send out informational things about how we need a new gymnasium or whatever their issue is. And the conservatives, we don't really have that already built in, which is why you see a billboard the second they announce a bond issue. There's already a billboard because there's already a group that has been put in place to be the build $6 billion more worth of Goddard schools. That's already there. So this in my mind, and I'm not even a part of this framework that is being built, but the goal, I would hope, eventually for grassroots people is to be able to say, we have a bond issue, and this is maybe we don't need this, or we don't need this in this fashion, and having a way to get that information out there quickly, get our own billboards, raise money, whatever we need to do to defeat or counter some of that other, the other side, who they already have it built in, it's already set up, established, they're ready to go the minute any of that stuff comes up.
From looking at your web address at sentinelksmo.org, are you covering news items east of State Line Road and in Missouri as well as in Kansas? Or is it strictly the Kansas side?
No, we're doing both. Jack does a lot of the stuff on the Missouri side. He lives on the Missouri side, but he has a pretty big presence in Kansas too. So one of the stories that he's covering today, it's not listed on here, but it's kind of a big story, and he's amazing because he notices things that other people don't. In North Kansas City School District, they've had in the last year and a half 5 administrators and teachers arrested and charged with sexually abusing students, and they end up with a little blurb in the paper, just a little almost police report of this person was arrested for this and he got fired, the end, and you never hear from it again. And he has contrasted that with the way the Star handled the priest molestation. There was one priest they ran who was he? He was a priest or a bishop. I'm not Catholic, so I don't want to mess it up.
He was a priest. The basis of this, they ran about 90 stories.
90 stories about
Basically
one
saying
guy.
This bishop needs to go. The bishop wasn't, but it was just he was the administrator.
He just happened to be the administrator, and so there's 5 people in the same school district who have been abusing children. And actually, I think in the priest case, the priest, I mean, not that this isn't abuse, he was taking pictures that he should not have been. But they were actually physically touching the students, and 90 stories to like 2 paragraphs here, 3 paragraphs there, and no connection of, oh my goodness, what is happening in this district. So yes, we are covering Missouri. Jack's doing a lot of it.
Let me jump in here.
Yeah.
And I mean, we just started in January. So right now we have 2 editors. Our goal long term, this is a nonprofit. So the more money we raise, the next editor we want to add would be somebody Wichita based. Then we want to have an editor long term, so we have one at least in each of the major population areas in Kansas. And what that'll allow us to do is start digging even deeper into a lot of the local issues, as well as the state issues.
Okay, this is good investigative journalism, but the rest of the story is what you do with it. And could you give us sort of your strategy goals and hopefully your dreams about how you're going to put this in enough hands to hold these people accountable for this level of propagandizing?
No, that's a great question. One of the things we're trying to do, we're trying to promote these stories heavily on social media, so that every story that goes on the website automatically goes out to Facebook and it goes out to Twitter. And we're trying to get folks. We've already had a number of organizations, some political parties and other interested folks sharing it and raising awareness of it. There is on the homepage of the Sentinel, you can sign up for the newsletter. So then every Monday you would get an email laying out the 9 or 10 big stories from the past week, to try to make that very easy. And that makes it easy for you to share as well as get reminded of what was out there. We're just really not even 3 months into operation, but we're hoping that over time we'll have more and more groups like pachyderm clubs, like county Republican clubs, others who might be interested in getting more facts out. And certainly we have a lot of legislators following this as well. And so they're getting information that they're not getting from other media. Great question.
Well, the problem with fake news and a great deal is that the papers or blogs do not follow journalism ethics, and the main components of ethics are pretty simple. You should seek the truth, the whole truth, and communicate it. Avoid sensationalism. Little sensationalism picks up your interest of your readers, and avoid lies, particularly caused by ideology or money interests. Do you in your writing and does the Sentinel plan to follow journalism's ethics?
Yes. I will say we're in a little bit of a lucky or a fortunate I want to call it almost the rest of the story. So there are some things, for example, in the I've written about Medicaid expansion several times in the last week or so, and I don't necessarily put in all of the talking heads saying Medicaid expansion is causing hospitals to close, because my goal is just to put the other bit out there. So do we plan to follow? I mean, yes, I'm not going to make stuff up. I'm going to try not to be sensationalist, all of those things. But I'm probably not going to call Anthony Hensley every day on speed dial and get his take on things. Anthony Hensley is a Democrat in the Kansas Senate. And mostly that's because I feel like you've already heard from him if you've read the Eagle and you've read the Star and you've read the Topeka Capital Journal and you've already heard from him. I'm not saying I won't quote him, but I'm not going to give him probably, and this is me personally, I'm speaking for me personally, not Jack, not a policy, just me personally. I'm going to assume that you're an avid newsreader who's trying to get as much information as you can, and if Anthony Hensley has already been quoted 9 million times somewhere else, I'm probably going to give him a sentence and ignore everything else he said. Not ignore, but it's not going to be the focal point, if that makes sense.
Do you guys have any sense as to impact you're making as far as on Kansas print media? Is anybody picking up your stuff at the print level, and/or is there any better avenues as far as radio stations or TV stations that might actually, be trying to find something other than just sort of the conventional narrative?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. We've had, just this morning, and it's not the first time, but just this morning, we got a lot of exposure on Andy Hooser's Voice of Reason, KQAM. There's an article this week in the Belle Plaine News. They asked to reprint one of Danedri's, so I think it was a Medicaid story.
I think so.
And there was, last week, it was an Oklahoma Catholic newspaper called and asked for reprinting rights for a story on a little private school in Johnson County that I think the tuition is $4,000 a year, and outcomes far better than what that most schools are seeing. They're above average and charging a lot less. So there was that story actually generated, and that's another example of the kind of things that the Sentinel tries to do. In that case, it wasn't so much directly contradicting something that was published, but there's a whole other side of the story that doesn't get told, because there are, if you look at things like the Catholic schools, look at achievement levels for Catholic schools versus public schools, and just comparing low income to low income, the Catholic schools do better. And now that's not just to say that therefore that's the best, but that's another narrative that doesn't get told. A couple of things that are on here, Kansas bond ratings are much greater. Most people, let me ask you, would this be an accurate thing to say if what you've been heard and told in the media is that Kansas bond ratings are pretty bad? Okay? Kansas bond ratings, according to Moody's and Standard & Poor's, are investment grade. And it has, they say, if you read the fine print of what they actually say, now the media doesn't talk about that. And it's not just here, it's everywhere. But basically, when you go from a AAA to a AA, it's like if one of your children came home from school with a test and said, last week I got a 97, this week I got a 95. That's kind of the impact. And yet these things don't get put in perspective. Tonight, you might hear something on the news about the jobs report that just came out for Kansas in March. And I'll guarantee you what you won't hear is that March it was the best private sector month in Kansas history.
There was one exception.
What?
September there was one.
Well, it was March, but it was the best March.
Yeah, it was March, yes.
February was the best February in Kansas history. So, are jobs growing as fast as we'd like? Of course not. but they're growing, and you need to put that in perspective. So we're trying to find, we are getting, and the more that we put those stories out, and it's like telling the Medicaid story at St. Francis, telling the story about these schools that are only costing a little bit of money, we think that's going to bring in a lot more people wanting to reprint our articles.
Record, Andy. Oh, go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say, in addition to getting those folks to I mean, I think that's a good metric to use. Like, are other people reading it? How many people are reading it? But I think almost as important are that the journalists are seeing. I mean, it sounds terrible, but if you have a public official that you want to hold accountable, you go to their town hall and ask them questions and really put them under the gun. So just our sheer existence, even if we don't have 6.7 million readers yet, I have a suspicion that some of the reporters are reading it, and from my own past experience, it was uncomfortable and awkward to be called out. And so I think that might make a small difference that is probably going to happen faster than us getting 6.7 million readers. But we'll get there.
Yeah.
We're just not there yet.
Although we did just
day.
get our first reader in Iceland this week.
And I should say a day. 6.7 million a day. We're not there yet.
Speaking of getting called out, have you had any mainstream media outlets yet try to review any of the stories that you have printed yet, because of the fact that you actually do numbers and not just whatever someone emails you?
No. We have had one or two reporters make snide remarks on social media, Twitter and Facebook, but never refuting anything that's been written.
The February and March numbers, I kind of smell the Trump effect on that, although the administration worked hard
I don't understand why reporting these numbers like it's like it's Tom Brady's numbers game over game. Dave and I were talking about this on the drive. I mean, I think it's important, but it's weird to me that we place so much emphasis on it because, I don't know. I was wondering, are these great numbers? Is that Brownback's policies working? I would say we have to say, since the other side has been saying constantly that he's failing, that we have to say, well, no, look, he's not. But I also suspect, is that the Trump effect? I don't think we know. So,
yeah.
I think it's probably some Trump, some good policies, a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of what caused it. I mean, that's just opinion.
Yes.
The fact is, it set a record. And by the way, 2016 set a record in Kansas. Private sector employment set a record. It was last year, throughout the months, Bureau of Labor Statistics was showing private sector jobs were down. But in March, every year they update every state. And they came back and said, oh no, Kansas actually added 9,100 private sector jobs. I challenge you to find one media outlet that wrote about that. And it set a record.
We have reporters come to the Pachyderm quite often, and I'm fascinated by the hidden news, the news that's reported from this lectern that never gets reported. Can you give us an example? Not you haven't been here, but what are some of the examples of hidden news that you have uncovered? Some stories, please.
I hidden news that I've uncovered. I don't know that I've uncovered anything hidden. I mean, I guess maybe just stuff that doesn't get reported. The information's available, just nobody's putting it out there. But for example, on here you'll see schools spent more than $5 million on lobbying and legal fees last year. Like that kind of thing doesn't get reported very often. I don't know that it's a secret. I hesitate to say secret. It's available information, but nobody's putting it out there. I mean, I think that's newsworthy in a time when we're talking about how destitute Kansas schools are. Well, they have $5 million to spend on lobbyists. I mean, and the lobbyists, they're not paying them what they're paying teachers. They're paying them 3 and 4 times what they're paying teachers. So,
yeah, there's the. I mean, I mentioned the job numbers, John, the bond ratings that they've covered. There's what often we see happen is, and this predates the Sentinel, but I remember last year there was I think it was Channel 12 here, did a story about the school district here, Wichita School District, and talking about, you know, the changes that that school funding was causing, and that's the key word, is causing. There's what they don't do, and in this case they didn't do, was look at the fact that they have many other options. It's the same thing as in that KCTV5 story that's on your table. This district had $67.5 million in operating cash at the beginning of the year. And that $42 million of that was an increase since 2005. That's money that they collected and didn't spend. They always have other options. Legislators don't tell school districts how many teachers to hire, whether to spend this dollar on instruction or something else, how much to pay teachers. Those are all local decisions. And what media often does is talk about and it's not all nefarious either. A lot of it is just, I know from my experience working inside newsrooms, a lot of it's just a little bit of laziness. They're under deadline pressures, hurry up and get this done. And some people are very good at training reporters. Because if you don't tell the story I want you to tell, I might not give you an interview next time. And so if part of your job is to cover the schools or to cover the city or something, and I literally had this happen to me when I was at Cake TV. A reporter said, "Oh, I can't go ask that question. They'll shut me out and I'll never get another interview from them." I said, "No, if they do that, you'll be the lead story live outside their office every day until they do talk to you." It's like the Army form of discipline. We can't make you do it, but we can make you damn sorry you didn't.
As you know, there's this incident in Pittsburgh, Kansas, where the high school students successfully uncovered their principal's resume as being fake. And they're receiving tremendous national attention on all kinds of media shows. Why do you think that is going on when it makes the establishment look so bad?
What? I don't know. Well, I think the national media, maybe where Kansas is concerned, doesn't necessarily have the same disdain for all things I think the national media treats that kind of stuff differently. I don't know that anybody here is giving any awards to those students, though they deserve it. But also, I think that journalists admire journalists, so they're not necessarily reporting on the establishment. They're reporting on themselves, is my suspicion. I mean, that was a great public interest story. Yeah. National media picked that up, local media picked it up, and it was a great story. But there was more to the story. Yeah. That Danedri wrote about. Well, I don't know that there's that. Oh, there is more to the story, and if you read the Sentinel, then you know that the HR director at that school is a former legislator, a former Democrat, of course, and who didn't have a degree until 6 months ago. In general studies. In general studies, not HR. I have suspicions about how all that stuff happened, but I don't. They're just me imagining things. You don't have to speculate why. No, it just did. That's part of the story that didn't get told until she told it. Yeah. The person who was doing the hiring or in charge of the hiring was maybe not qualified for the job that she's in. And I don't know for sure. And that's an example of Danedri wrote the story, but it came from a resident in the area. Hey, did you know this? So having the just for people to know that this entity exists, we're starting to see, we're getting tips. We've had school board members call and say, look, I've got to tell you this story. I'm fed up. I've had it. They can't touch me anymore because I don't work for government. I want to tell you the story. We're starting to get things like that. And so you can go, if you have a tip, you can go, there's a Get Involved page on the website where you can just send your ideas, and it goes right to news desk at sentinelksmo.org, and the editors all see that.
Back here with Deb. Well, that was actually going to be part of my question. If we had a tip, where do we go with it? But then the second part of the question is, what resources do you have to do the research? Is it just you doing research, or do you have other researchers to, like some really juicy things or some things that are really complicated, like, who's getting awarded things at the legislature, and why are they getting those things, and who are they tied to, and do you know what those kinds of things? So do you have other resources to help you out?
Like actual paid people doing stuff? No, but I am known as something of a gossip. So I have a lot of people who will send me information who have instant access to some of it and send it my direction, like the legitimate stuff. But you know, you can find anything if you dig long and hard enough on the internet. But if you hear something, I have some people who will, little birdies that will tell me, you need to look at it here. Oh, here it is, but you can find it on this website or in this place also. So somebody paid doing research? Not so much.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
Well, in this era of tight state budgets, the legislature historically is supposed to meet for 90 days. I've heard talk that they could meet for 120 days this year at $40,000 a day, and yet we're talking about a tight state budget. I think that story needs to get out. The cost of having the state legislature, our debating society. And incidentally, the great state of Texas meets every other year. And how do they do it and save all that money every other year when we meet every year and it goes historically over 90 days at $40,000 a day?
That's a very good question, and you probably will, once they get past the 90 or pushing up against the 90-day limit, you probably will see a lot of media writing about that and asking those questions. I mean, historically, that's what they've done. Why it gets to there is a different question, and a lot of that comes down to politics.
Right.
Because and that's, I don't mean that, that's a very bipartisan. It crosses all ideological spectrums. You have some people who don't want to take on controversial things. And some of those are sitting home this year because they wouldn't take them on in the past. You have some people who they'll push behind the scenes for something, but they won't take a public vote. There are some of it is just the way the structure is set up, so that you have separate committees dealing with tax and budget. And so you've got both of them looking at each other and saying, well, how much do I know I need to raise in tax until you get your budget done? Well, we can't get our budget done until you tell us how much revenue we have. So there's a lot of different reasons that go into that, but at the bottom, it's all about politics. And when they think they can have the most advantageous time to start taking votes. Another complicating factor that hopefully should get changed is Kansas. This week, yesterday, the consensus revenue estimates came out. That's one of the big challenges every time you do a budget, because it doesn't make sense to wait until April 20 to get that information. And so the legislature can't do anything. They're waiting to see how much more revenue or less revenue they might have. If we were to move that, because what's going to happen is there's almost every year they're taking their best guess at what the April revenues might be. It's the biggest month. Wait 2 weeks, get all the April revenue in, and you know exactly what came in. Then you're going to have a better estimate. So maybe you don't start, so you move the legislative session from, instead of starting mid-January, start at mid-February. So you don't take more days, but you have a better time frame in which to make a lot of decisions.
Over here.
I had another question about on the print media. Can you tell us exactly, how kind of the PAC works in Kansas? I mean, is this like Kansas City Star driven? Is it Topeka Capital Journal driven? I mean, what's kind of that aspect? Then secondarily, do you guys have any, do you think like you'll see like these weekly alternative newspapers like on college campuses or something, as far as eventually going that kind of route? Do you have any thoughts on that as a possibility?
I have some theories about why the journalists in Topeka are all a pod. And I think it goes back to when I was in journalism school, which was longer ago than I would like to admit out loud. But I think they're naturally leftists, and they want to be the cool kids. I mean, so they're just running around following each other, and being cool kids together, which I guess that's fun if you're 20. And then I think what Dave said, a little bit of laziness. So it's really easy to get a press release from Anthony Hensley and just run it without asking any questions or doing any research. And you have a deadline to meet, and nobody's going to scoop you if you are all running the same story, which I think is very, very strange. I mean, I remember in college being so jealous of like the people in Dallas who had 2 newspapers and the people in Seattle who, and none of these places do anymore. Dallas might still, but none of these places do anymore. They had 2 newspapers, and in my head, they're all like Woodrow, and they're scrapping, and they're not buddies. They're like fighting with each other to get the best tip and the best. And I feel like these guys are all buddies, and they just want to hang out and drink beer together. It's very weird. I don't understand it, honestly. And I'll let Dave answer the other part.
Okay. You know, they do tend to run in a pack. And when you have reporters who have similar, well, not only similar perhaps personal opinions, but you have similar ownership. I mean, the McClatchy newspaper kind of prides itself on having a progressive approach. And so you've got 2 of them right there at Kansas City Star and Wichita Eagle, that's in the water at those newspapers. But another aspect of it is, you know, because it's common, I've heard this a lot, why don't they talk more about the conservative viewpoint? Well, part of that is a lot of conservatives won't talk. Now, some of them say, why should I? Because we're going to not be treated fairly. And sometimes you're not going to get treated fairly. But it's like an old travel agent friend of mine. He had a sign on his desk that said, if you don't fly first class, your heirs will. If you don't tell your story, even if only part of it gets out, somebody else is telling your story. You're allowing them to set the agenda. And so in fact, it's not unusual for advice to go around inside the Capitol, don't talk to media, don't talk to media. Well, you're just asking for it. Get out there and talk to media. Get your case out, understand the issues, and get out there and make sure, because if they don't, then you have a press conference and talk about what they didn't get right. So it's not just media's, or tweet, it's not just media's fault. A lot of this is self-inflicted.
Back here with Myron.
Just a quick question, since you are a journalism graduate, which do you feel has more influence in culture, the journalism instructors, the journalism schools, or the environment once the journalist graduates and goes to work?
That's a really good question. I do think, for whatever reason, I don't know why, I have always been conservative, and I was a conservative in college, and I'll probably be a conservative until I die. I think that a lot of conservatives don't enter the field. I mean, let's be honest. We're the smart kids. We're the ones who are going to go where there's a job that's going to pay you well, and journalism is not it. So there's that, and I feel like of my college peers, I will say I went to K-State a lot of years ago. Most of my professors are no longer there, but they were, until I graduated, I really didn't know where they were. I may have been delusional, I was a kid, but I had no idea. They're liberals, I know that now because we're still friends, but I did not know that when I was a student. So I'm not going to fault them. I guess, and now I was talking to Dave about this on the way up here. Most of my peers who were journalism majors at the time, they're still working, and of course we're all still Facebook friends, and all of them they were liberal then. The few that were more conservative are more liberal than they were, except for one girl. There were 2 conservatives who worked at the Collegian the whole 4 years I was there, and she writes about horses now. So I don't know. That's what she wanted to do. She doesn't. She's not political. She's not interested in it. So I don't. It's a good question. I guess I'm going to say the environment afterwards, maybe, because I think you go to all these things and you hear all these bureaucrats. You go to school board meetings. You start covering school board meetings, and you hear superintendents who are mostly liberals tell their boards how destitute they are, and you believe them because he's got 6,000 degrees behind his name, and he's older, and he's got a way nicer suit than you do. So you believe them, and maybe it seeps in. I'm making guesses. I don't know. You're asking me to be a psychologist. I'm not. Or psychiatrist.
One other, I mean, certainly journalism schools and instructors play a factor there. But in my experience working with a lot of reporters, a lot of it also came out as it was how they were raised. So I grew up in West Virginia. Now, I was north of the Mason-Dixon line where we wore shoes and we didn't have appliances on our front porch. But in that part of the country, you have a lot of people raised around the dinner table hearing bad things about business. And so an awful lot of when I started reflecting on this, talking with some of our reporters, what comes off a lot of time as pro-government, deep down with some of these people that's a default because it's more anti-business. If they've been raised to, the company is always out to get. Think about the way things are written. It's all about the profit. Now, that's not what government technically says. That's a different mindset. So and some of it is how they're raised.
Okay, back here with Bob.
So, at the national level, we oftentimes hear criticism about the revolving door between government and lobbyists, that elected officials or bureaucrats gain some experience in government and go become lobbyists and things like that. But we have quite a few examples here in Wichita and Kansas of journalists going to work for government. I think one of the most prominent examples in recent years is Scott Rothschild, a reporter for the Lawrence Journal-World, who now is the communications director for the Kansas Association of School Boards. So I was wondering if you thought that was a problem or any general remarks about that.
No, I don't know whether it's a problem or not, Bob. It's pretty, especially as TV and newspaper newsrooms have been shrinking over the last 20 years, it's become more and more prevalent to see them sometimes go to government, sometimes go to public, they become public affairs person at a company or at a government. It's, if you have some communication skills, then you're going to go where those jobs are. I don't think it's a problem per se if someone decides they want to work for a Kansas Association of School Boards instead of a newspaper. But it's just, part of that is because there's people, newsrooms are cutting back and they're looking for other work.
And there's money. There's money. So I'll just say, and there's money. I mean, most people, if you're 20 and you go work in a newsroom right now, you make $25,000, $30,000, and you make $40,000 20 years later, and you can go work and be a PIO for somebody or a public affairs person and make 60. So some of it's just money.
Over here with Mark.
Thank you for being here today. Looking at the national conservative media, everything from talk radio to Bill O'Reilly to the whole spectrum, why is it, and this is my perception, why is it that on the Democrat side of the aisle, they're always hanging together, they're always supporting each other, and they're always, acting as a united group, it seems that way, and yet when you look on the conservative side, you have dog eat dog, and you have a lot of dissension. You have the Bill O'Reilly situation. You have various conservative media groups fighting each other. And I would just like you to comment on that. Is Trump responsible for that? Is there trying to curry favor with Trump? Was that what's going on?
That's I don't think so. But I understand what you're saying because the reason I say I don't think so is because that long predates Trump. It's been kind of that way unfortunately for quite a long time, where you have and it's interesting because if I understood it right and remember it, you talked about Democrats on one side and conservatives on the other. There shouldn't be, in my opinion, Democrat or conservative media outlets, because now you've already said we're giving up journalism and we're going for activism. But part of that nuance, I think, in the disparity is that, let's say, people on the Democrat progressive side tend to have a lot of the common beliefs. When you get to conservative or more broadly Republican, that's not the case. Partly, I think it's because of the kind of the independent streak that runs in people who tend to be more conservative or libertarian. Part of it also is that in certain parts of the country, like Kansas, it's hard to get elected as a Democrat. So you run as a Republican. In fact, Kansas Policy Institute publishes a Freedom Index, where we track legislators voting on matters of constitutional issues and economic freedom and student-focused education. In the past, not this Senate, but the previous Senate, well, 2 Senates ago, it was common to see a Republican get the highest score and the lowest score in the Kansas Senate. The preliminary results for this session has a Republican tied for bottom in the House. So it's some of it is just, it's not, you can't compare parties because the parties don't have the similar makeup anymore.
Well, and I would actually disagree a little bit that the Democrats don't eat their own. I don't think they do it as often as we do on this side of the aisle, but I do think the Democrats are getting there. They're having wars. The Bernie and Hillary people, they're having wars. They're about to learn what conservatives have been suffering through for several years, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the thing. They eat their own in
The
private.
media doesn't help them do it. I think the difference is the media doesn't help them do it. That's my own opinion.
Yeah.
Hey, over here, Carl.
The Kansas Taxpayers Network, when we did the vote rating, we had the same experience in terms of Republicans and high and low. My question for you is, a few years ago, I became aware that the Kansas Health Institute had hired a whole bunch of former State House reporters. And in fact, it had set up, I think arguably, probably the largest news bureau in the state of Kansas. And it seems to be working on the same type of model of news coverage now, in the sense that perhaps what you all are going forward with. Are you aware of their activities, and are you aware of any other groups that are kind of going in a new approach outside of the traditional newspaper, radio, TV models for providing news coverage?
Actually, that model changed this year. That was the case for many years, but the news people at the Kansas Health Institute now work for public radio. So you might say that there's not a lot of difference there, but they're now part of KCUR FM out of Kansas City. I think some of the funding is still provided by Kansas Health Institute. When I talked to their managing editor, this is like December, January, when they were just getting ready to make the change, he said they did it because they felt like a lot of the reporters felt constrained. Because if you work for the Kansas Health Institute, you're kind of obligated, or at least you feel like you might be, to provide favorable coverage for the things that the Kansas Health Institute believes in. Interestingly, I've not seen their reporting change now that they're at public radio, but that was the only one that I know of where there's really kind of any kind of mass involved in trying to report from other than a kind of traditional media.
Can you share with us some of your fake news stories, things that you've uncovered? Two more questions. That's one, and we've got the last one.
Okay. Well, let's see.
I honestly, I don't really like the term fake news, but I mean, I know that's the term now. Thank you, Donald Trump.
We certainly have a revenue problem in the news media instead of a spending problem.
Right. Well, true. I mean, I think fake news is kind of, I just don't like the term. But, and I don't know that honestly, I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So there's stuff on this sheet and stuff every day that I encourage all of you to go look at. We're uncovering stuff constantly.
Can I just tell you a story and then you tell me how you would handle it?
Yes.
You have the mic. You tell the story.
The story is this, and remember, I can't verify this, but we have a very serious running at large for dogs in Wichita problem.
Okay.
It's very serious. There's a lot of people losing their mail service because of it. But here's the story.
Okay.
2 boys ran out into the street. One of them was killed by an automobile, and the other one is in rehab in Nebraska. We don't know whether it's true or not, but we have heard by rumor that those boys were run out into the street by dogs. if and it's true, it is another reason for the city to do something about the running at large problem with dogs in the city of Wichita. Now, what I'm asking you is that a story we could bring you and you would run it or deal with it? Or do you have any way of verifying its authenticity? Because I can't even tell you that it's a true story, but I can tell you it's a rumor.
Well, I think there are a couple of ways you can maybe avoid the rumor or verify it by finding some witnesses or the family of the boy that's in rehab, which if you brought, I mean, I'm interested. That's where I would probably try to start, find some people who maybe saw it. But even if you can't get that specific story, you could definitely find out, I'm sure the police department keeps police records of dog bites and that kind. I mean, if you get bit by a dog, you should call the police, and they'll have a record of it. How many dog bites? How many times is animal control being called to pick up? And you could compare it to some other cities. And if people are saying there's a dog, you can definitely. You say there's a dog problem. Here's how many dogs are running, getting picked up, and how many dog bites are happening each year, and. You can make the argument. Yeah, I'd be interested in doing the story. I'm not sure I could run the gossip.
The Wichita Eagle covered it, but they didn't cover that aspect. And I felt like they needed to go knock on the door and find out the reality. My other question is this: would you explain exactly how we get in touch with your publication? And do you charge a fee? We just go to the internet, make it real clear how we get in touch with your publication.
On the bottom of this page on your desk is the website address, sentinelksmo.org. We're a nonprofit, or it's a nonprofit. I'm speaking as a board member now. And there's no fees. It's free for anyone to use or spread. But if you'd like to make a donation, there's an easy way to make an online contribution because we don't take any government money. We exist strictly on the generosity of our readers.
Not on advertising?
No. We don't take advertising, and there's a number of reasons we don't do advertising. Part of it gets into you have to be careful about the amount of revenue. If you're a nonprofit, you have to be careful about how much you take in non-contributed revenue. But no, it's strictly contributions.
One other way, yes, I was gonna say one other way real quick. You can sign up for the, if you don't wanna go to the same website every day and read all the stories, you can definitely sign up for the email, and it comes once a week. You won't get every single story, but you'll get the top 5 to 10 stories.
All right. Danedri Herbert and Dave Trabert. Let's give them a giant thank you for coming. We have a thank you card for you.